It was her first Mother's Day without her son, and the weight of that emptiness hung in every corner of the small house. Joan moved through the morning like a shadow of herself, her fingers brushing past a dusty photo frame on the mantel. Matthew's smile stared back at her, frozen, young, full of life. She placed the frame face down. Outside, the neighborhood was alive with flowers and family visits, but Joan kept her curtains drawn. She had canceled church, ignored calls from her sister, and left her cell phone in a drawer. Every part of this day used to revolve around Matthew. The pancakes, the long walks, the way he called her Mama Bear. Now all of it felt like glass under her skin. In the kitchen, she absent-mindedly stirred a spoon through her tea until it went cold. The radio played soft country music in the background, but it only made the silence deeper. Her eyes drifted to the empty seat across from her, where Matthew always sat with that crooked grin. Her chest tightened as she pushed the mug away. Since the accident, she hadn't touched his room. The door remained closed, like a vault holding back everything she wasn't ready to feel. Sometimes, late at night, she'd sit on the floor outside it, pressing her back against the door and listening to the stillness. Today, she couldn't bear to go near it. Down the block, kids rode bikes and neighbors chatted near mailboxes. But Joan stayed locked inside her grief. She shuffled to the living room and sank into her recliner, wrapping herself in the cardigan Matthew had bought her 2 years ago. It still smelled faintly like his cologne, sandalwood, and rain. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to escape. Then, a sound. Faint, a soft rustling outside the window. Joan stiffened, unsure if it was real or just her mind playing tricks again. But then it came again. A low, warbled meow, drawn out and strange. Her eyes snapped open and her heart gave a little jolt. She walked slowly toward the front door, unsure why her hands trembled. When she opened it, the spring air rushed in, full of honeysuckle and cut grass. On the porch, curled tightly on the doormat, was a street cat, orange tabby, skinny, and covered in mud. It looked up at her with wide yellow eyes. The cat didn't run. It just stared, unblinking, like it had been waiting for her. Joan hesitated, her instinct telling her to shoo it away, but something in its eyes, something tired and knowing, made her pause. It let out another long meow, raspy and cracked, like it had been crying. Joan looked up and down the street, expecting a neighbor or a child to come claim it, but no one was there. Just this cat sitting like it belonged, like it had chosen her porch for a reason. Her hand hovered over the doorknob, torn between retreat and invitation. The cat inched forward, still watching her. Something inside her shifted. Just a little, the cat gave a final, softer meow, then rested its chin on its paws like it wasn't going anywhere. Joan stood frozen in the doorway, her mind racing with questions she couldn't explain. And in the quiet between them, she whispered, "Who sent you?" Joan didn't move for a long time. She stood barefoot on the cool hardwood floor, watching the cat settle deeper into itself, as if this porch had always been its home. Her chest ached with a strange, unfamiliar feeling, not quite grief, not quite peace. It was a pull, soft but insistent. The cat was filthy, fur matted with dried leaves and dirt, and its left ear had a small tear near the top. There was a faint limp when it tried to shift position, a stiffness in its back leg that made Joan wince in sympathy. Its body was thin, ribs visible beneath the striped fur. Yet somehow, it looked calm, like it had known worse and survived. She walked back inside without a word, returning moments later with an old saucer and a half-open can of tuna she found in the back of her cupboard. She hadn't fed a pet in over 20 years, not since her husband's dog died of cancer. As she set the plate down on the porch, the cat slowly approached, but didn't pounce. It waited, watching her, as if unsure whether to trust. The way it hesitated reminded her of herself. Cautious, exhausted, hollowed out by something it couldn't name. When it finally lowered its head to eat, the sound of its licking filled the silence around them. Joan crouched slowly, her knees popping, just to be a little closer. "You poor thing," she whispered, and it paused just long enough to look up again. She should have left it there. It was a stray, possibly sick, definitely a risk. What if it scratched her? What if it brought fleas or worse? Joan stood up, suddenly annoyed with herself for getting involved. She turned to go back inside, telling herself the cat would be fine now that it had eaten. But her feet didn't move. Something in her knew that walking away would echo too loudly later when the house was silent again. She stood with her hand on the screen door, caught in that fragile space between old instinct and new impulse. The cat had stopped eating and was now sitting by the edge of the saucer, tail curled tightly, waiting for something. Joan sighed, rubbed her temple, then opened the door wider. She muttered, as if annoyed by her own kindness. She disappeared inside and returned with a towel, laying it gently on a patch of sunlit floor near the doorway. "Just for a little while," she said, not sure if she was talking to the cat or herself. To her surprise, the cat rose and walked in like it had been invited properly. It didn't explore, didn't dart around like animals usually do when placed in new spaces. Instead, it limped straight to the towel and curled up, eyes closing as if it had reached the place it was always meant to find. Joan sat down on the arm of the recliner, stunned by the ease of it. She glanced at the framed photo on the shelf, the one she had turned down that morning. Without thinking, she picked it up again. "Matthew used to bring home strays too," she said softly, eyes still on the sleeping cat. "Said everyone deserves a place to rest." Her voice cracked. She didn't finish the sentence. That night, Joan sat beside the towel for hours, watching the cat breathe. She Googled nearby shelters but didn't call. She thought of her son, how he'd rescue things without needing a reason. Her eyes welled up as she reached down and brushed a finger gently across the cat's head. It didn't flinch, and in that moment she knew she couldn't let it go. The next morning, sunlight poured into the living room, casting soft gold across the towel where the cat still lay. Joan had barely slept, waking every hour to check if it was still breathing. The house didn't feel quite as empty with another living thing inside. For the first time in months, she made breakfast for two. One plate with toast, one saucer with tuna. The cat's limp hadn't improved, and it still wouldn't eat much. Joan sat on the floor beside it, a warm mug of tea in her hands, her knees drawn to her chest. She whispered stories about Matthew, his awful guitar playing, how he once rescued a squirrel with a shoebox and a popsicle stick splint. The cat just blinked slowly, listening like it understood. By midweek, she had named him Oliver. She wasn't sure why. The name just came to her as she stroked the patch of fur above his nose. She wrapped him gently in a blanket and took him to the local vet, a young woman named Dr. Bailey, who reminded Joan of a younger version of herself. "He's older than he looks," the vet said, "but he's a fighter." Oliver had a fractured paw, signs of past abuse and a respiratory infection. Joan's hands trembled as she signed the treatment papers. Not because of the cost, but because of the commitment. "You're really taking him home?" Dr. Bailey asked, kindly but surprised. Joan nodded, brushing a tear from her cheek. "He found me. I think I owe him something." Back at home, she cleared a corner in Matthew's room, laying down blankets, a litter box, and a few borrowed sous from the vet's office. Opening that door had once felt impossible, but now it seemed necessary. Healing required letting life back in. She watched Oliver limp around the room, sniffing the air, curling up beneath Matthew's old desk. It didn't feel wrong. It felt right. As the days passed, Joan found herself talking out loud more. She described her errands, read aloud from the newspaper, even started humming again while washing dishes. Oliver followed her from room to room, never meowing, just present. His quiet companionship was like a balm on her raw edges, steady and warm. One afternoon, her neighbor Doris stopped by with a pie and caught sight of Oliver in the window. "Did you finally get yourself a cat?" Doris asked, grinning. Joan hesitated, then laughed softly. "No, I think he got himself a human." For the first time in months, her voice held a softness that wasn't lined with pain. Joan's daughter, Liza, called later that week and was surprised when her mother answered on the first ring. "You sound different," Liza said. "Are you okay?" Joan glanced at Oliver, now sleeping with his head resting on one of Matthew's old socks. "I think I will be," she said gently. "There's someone here who reminds me how to keep going." The town senior center had a bulletin board where people could post photos. Joan brought one in, a picture of Oliver lying in the sunlight with a caption underneath. "Found on my doorstep. Saved my life more than I saved his." Other seniors began asking about him. Some even visited, bringing treats and stories of their own lost companions. One of them, a retired firefighter named Frank, brought Joan a hand-carved wooden plaque that read, "Every soul deserves a second chance." Joan hung it above Oliver's bed. That night, as she turned off the lights and listened to his quiet purring, she felt something she hadn't in months, a sense of purpose flickering back to life. Joan's house was still quiet, but no longer hollow. Oliver had claimed his place on the back of the couch, where the morning sun hit just right. He spent his days napping, stretching, following her like a little orange shadow. There was peace now, not the absence of pain, but the presence of something healing. Joan began waking earlier, making her bed, brushing her hair, even putting on lipstick again. Small rituals that once seemed pointless now felt like acts of care. Not just for her, but for the little soul watching her with steady yellow eyes. Each morning she'd greet him with, "Good morning, mister," and he'd blink as if saying it back. They developed routines. Afternoon tea for her, a bit of warm chicken for him. Evening TV, where he curled into her lap during the weather forecast. At night, he'd sleep at her feet, a soft weight that tethered her gently to the world. She no longer cried herself to sleep. Sometimes, she even dreamed of Matthew and woke up smiling. The house started filling up again, not with noise, but with presence. Joan opened the curtains more. She put fresh flowers in the kitchen and planted herbs by the window. She even invited Liza over for Sunday lunch, something she hadn't done since the funeral. When Liza arrived and saw Oliver, she whispered, "He really found you, didn't he?" At the senior center, Joan shared Oliver's story during a grief support circle. She didn't mean to, but the words came out easily, like a river finding its path. People listened with tears in their eyes as she spoke about losing her son and finding a battered cat on her porch. "He didn't fix everything," she said, "but he gave me somewhere to put the love I still have." Inspired by Joan, the center launched a small pet adoption board, connecting seniors with rescue animals. They called it Matthew's Porch, after her story. Within a month, 4 cats and 2 dogs had new homes. Joan helped others prepare, offering advice, lending supplies, and always reminding them, "Let them choose you. That's when it matters." Oliver's limp improved, though it never fully went away. Joan joked that it made him walk like a little old man. He'd sit beside her as she crocheted blankets for the shelter, occasionally pawing at the yarn like a child begging for attention. Her hands no longer shook when she worked. They were steady, purposeful. On the first anniversary of Matthew's passing, Joan placed a framed photo of him beside Oliver's bed. "You would have loved him." She didn't plan a big memorial. Just a quiet morning, a cup of tea, and Oliver beside her, watching the trees sway outside. It was enough. Later that day, a young woman knocked on her door, holding a bruised kitten she'd found near the church. Joan smiled and stepped aside. "Bring him in. We've got room." Oliver lifted his head but didn't move, as if giving silent approval. Joan looked at the kitten, then at the sunlight pouring in. Her voice was steady. "He didn't just save a cat, he gave me back to myself."